Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved, immortal beings, and good-looking people. Maybe you're good-looking because you're always looking for and finding the good. You tuned in to Hug America podcast for one reason only, because you care the most in the entire world about you. And that's great, because when you become the best you make the world a better place. You build more bridges of harmony, create more joy, happiness, peace, and love. Here we are, the Hug America podcast, the first three letters of the word happy, with your humble host, Barry Shore, the ambassador of joy and the greatest storyteller in America, the amazing, the indubitably indomitable, the only one, our dear friend, Neal Foard. That's Foard. So I'm just going to turn it right over to wonderful Neal, because we're going to talk about a topic today that is truly important, because it touches the very being of what it means to be American and who we are in this world and what it is that we're here to do and to serve. So without any more ado, I love that word, ADO, adieu. And we're not bidding you all adieu until the end of the show. Wonderful. You like that? Was that cool? That was pretty good.
That was. Did you spontaneously think of that? That was pretty good.
That was just right now. So well it's on you, my dear beloved friend.
I'm man, Barry. I love this topic, and you'll forgive me because I have so much to say on this that I'm going to probably lose the plot. But let me begin by something I wasn't going to talk about, but I want to go back to, because moments ago, you gave this introduction in which you said that when you are your best self, you spread. Could you please say it more slowly?
Yes. When you're the best you build more bridges.
Okay. That was it.
Right.
Okay. I'm not sure. See, you've said it so many times. I mean, you've committed it to memory, that I think that you may be in danger of losing a little bit of the profundity of what you've got there, what you came up with. So let's go to it. Let's dig into it, because you've said something really profound. When you are your best you build bridges. And I want to contrast that with walls.
Ooh.
And what you've said, I want to reinforce for everybody that's listening and watching that in the time that I've known this man, he's just this fountain of joy and happiness, and he's spreading these things. He's like a vitamin pill. He's like a beam of sunshine. Every day you need people like Barry to remind you that, you know what, most people, and I mean most people, are really cool and good and want to help. But you know what happens? We sometimes let our worst selves out. And I believe that our current news media / social media, I think they reinforce that there's a lot of ill people out there, bad people. And I just want to say, if you give yourself the chance to be your best self, you're going to build bridges to other good people. You're going to there was another part of it. So you build bridges, and then what else happens? What else?
And you create more joy, happiness, peace, and love.
So sorry for that editorial, folks. And that may have not been the most exciting thing, but that needs to be said. Okay. So let's talk about what it means to be American, what an American is. Certainly not perfect. I think we've got abundant evidence for that. But I wonder if Americans, perhaps more than most nationalities, have in their minds that they want to get better as a country.
Ooh, yes.
That it has always been the ambition of the country to try to live up to its ideals. We often fail. We fail a lot. Let's just, if you use an example of slavery, there were a lot of constitutional authors before the 1783 finally becoming a nation. I don't think our Constitution was ratified until 89. I'm not sure, but in any case, slavery was fought over a lot. There were Jefferson himself, who owned slaves, but didn't believe in it. I unpack that, okay? But he nevertheless was arguing vehemently for the discontinuation of slavery because it was so hypocritical of the country to have declared its independence based on inalienable rights, only to then rob certain people of those rights. Okay, but we took 100 years, but we got rid of it. That's the throw of America, is it bends towards justice. It operates slowly, and there are setbacks, and you walk forward, you walk back. But I'm not sure that a lot of nations have in their spirit that we're trying to get better despite our worse angels. Now, let me talk about a few things that are true of America. And this, whenever I say these statistics, people do not believe me. They think I'm making it up. Here's the first one. If you added up every single McDonald's and every single Starbucks, it would not come close to the number of museums, historical sites, what do you call it when you go into a place and you look at the stars? What do they call that? Astronomy. What do they call that? You know what I'm talking about.
Planetarium.
Aquariums, and other cultural educational sites. So let me repeat that. If you gathered up museums, cultural sites, museums, planetariums, etc., and you combine that, it is almost
It dwarfs.
50% more. It dwarfs the number of Starbucks and McDonald's. When I say that statistic, people are like, that can't be true. It can't be true. No, it's true. Google it. Google it. Okay, here's another one. The number of people that attend major league sporting events, soccer, football, basketball, hockey, it does not even come close to the number of people who go to museums and cultural events and so forth. Now, people do not believe me, but you just Google it. What I'm trying to communicate is that, yes, we have a fascination for sports. I love sports. I think sports tell a marvelous story when it's done right. But Americans are interested in culture. They are hungry and thirsty for history and art and architecture and music and dance. People love to dance in America.
Yes.
Right? They do. Line dancing and EDM. Barry, I was completely unaware of this thing called EDM, electronic dance music. I was completely unaware of it until I got into the events business, the live events business. And then we were at a trade show at which this expert was getting up there and he was talking about electronic dance music. And the audience was, well, let me describe what he did as his presentation. He gets up in front of the room. He's got a slide presentation and he says, "Hey, I want you to raise your hand when you recognize one of the faces that I'm going to show you in this presentation." And what he was doing was a slide presentation. We were just showing one person's photo after another. And he goes, "When you finally recognize somebody, I want you to raise your hand." Okay. All right. So he shows one face, 2, 3, 4, and so it goes. He gets to the 9th face, and finally it's Beyonce, and we all raise our hands. And he goes, okay. And then he shows a couple more faces and we don't recognize. And then there's Jay-Z, and there's Kanye, and there's, Bryan Adams and all these other. Okay, now we're finally starting to recognize people. Oh, there's Tom Hanks. Oh, there's Tom Cruise. What he was showing was, in order, the people that make more money than anybody else in show business. And the first 8 of them were DJs for electronic dance music. Now, first of all, I'm like, well, I don't believe it. I'm going to have to look that up, which I did. And I was educated. And what it meant was that people, what they were really paying to do was not go to passively watch a performance, but to participate. Right? Exactly. To get up and jam and have a wonderful time. Now, when you go to an EDM, there's a lot of love flying around. There's a lot of togetherness and belonging and happiness. It was something I was completely unaware of.
So let me chime in here, which is a part of music and dancing, and give you a proof for what you just said. If you ask anybody, most of the people, of course, never been there. If you ask anybody what was the quintessential event in the 1960s in the United States of America,
Oh yeah,
it wasn't
nice.
Chicago in '68 and the Kent State.
Right.
Terrible. Those are events. Woodstock.
It was Woodstock.
Woodstock. Everything about Woodstock in the memory was about music. That's
Yeah.
it. It was the 3 days of unprecedented 500,000 people plus
It was
gathering spontaneously for
spontaneous.
music and dancing.
Yeah, it was so.
It's America.
It really was a really good example of a kind of we had no idea, right? You know, like because even the promoters were going, "Wait a minute, hang on, this is out of control. Who knew it was going to be this kind of people?" And the
Right.
performers, you know, I highly recommend to your listeners. There are multiple documentaries on Woodstock. You got to watch one or two,
Right.
because to when you go back to what it was and what it meant, and who was there and what they got out of it, and the people that attended it, like I mean, it was an astonishing, almost spontaneous occurrence. I say almost because obviously they promoted it and they had to get all the artists and they had to helicopter them in because they couldn't drive them in because of the traffic
Couldn't
jam.
drive, and almost every one of the performers became iconic
Yes,
after that event.
right. And by the way, do you know that Shana Na was on the bill?
I love Shanana. Happened to be okay. Just a little data point. Shanana. You got it, people. If you don't know it, look it up. It's very cool. Those are all guys from my hometown of Brookline, Massachusetts.
Yeah, and they were a
Doo-wop
doo-wop
and all
group.
kinds. I mean, just stuff.
And the crazy thing was that the audience embraced them just the same as they did,
Jimi
Hendrix or
Airplane.
Jefferson Airplane. Yeah. And Santana. I think Carlos Santana was all of about 17 years old.
By the way, this is so wonderful. Carlos Santana not only is still alive, he still performs because his whole being is channeling music. That's who he is.
So I bring all of that up, and thank you for that Woodstock reference, by the way, because that's a really good example of a kind of proto EDM. It's much the same kind of participatory. I don't happen to like EDM. I'm not into it, but I went with my son to see a DJ in downtown LA, and I just dug the fact that he was digging it. It's fun. I have said before that the thing that gives me more joy than anything in the world is just watching my wife laugh. That it's like
I have a similar experience. Thank you.
Right on. Good. Yeah, it's fun. I take more pleasure out of her pleasure, and that's what happens when you become a parent. Is that you just want them to be having a good time.
Right. And by the way, I call it with my wife. I call it a tee-hee. She's not out. She doesn't do guffaws like I do. She's more. She does literally tee-hees like that. And then I just get tickled.
Yeah, exactly. And so to go back to my sort of earlier point about like that Americans we enjoy culture just as much, more so, truthfully, than sport and spectacle. And my brother-in-law is a really good example. He's a highly educated engineer. Man, he will hit a museum and just dig in. And it doesn't even have to be a subject he's interested in. Look, it's a radio museum. Let's check that out. When you drive from Los Angeles to Lake Tahoe, you pass through a town called Lone Pine. Lone Pine used to be like a lot of those little towns at the base of the Eastern Sierras. Those little towns used to do a lot of films for the Westerns. They used to shoot a lot of Westerns up there. So they've got this film museum. And Barry, it's freaking amazing when you go in there and you're like, what is this doing here? This museum, but it's really cool. And it's got all kinds of interesting information about how they would shoot like High Plains Drifter or I forget the names of the movies, but you get the idea. It's like it's out in the middle of nowhere. you know, to
And that, by
compliment
the way,
people.
that's why they filmed them the westerns out
Right.
there.
Right.
In the old days, you don't have to have a stage and quiet down. Okay, I want to do one thing because people just loving is leaning in. We're going to do a brief commercial break, and we would not be urging you to listen to this commercial break if we didn't think that there was benefit to you in it. So we urge you to utilize whoever's advertising, and there's something special you're going to see this advertising. We'll be right back after this brief message with more America's greatest storyteller and the ambassador of joy on Hug America. Good day, beautiful, bountiful, beloved immortal beings, and good-looking people. Maybe you're good-looking, because you're always looking for and finding the good. Our cup runneth over with good. And we have wonderful Neal and Barry, and Neal is telling us more about who we are as a nation. We dig culture, we dig information that uplifts, and
Yeah.
and we love also sports and music. But as he's saying, more museums and places to visit like that than there are Starbucks and McDonald's. So you want to fill yourself up with stuff that's really going to be of benefit to you? Check them out.
Yeah. The one of the stories I had told had as a kind of moral: stop listening to things that make you mad, and start listening to things that make you better. And that's the nature, I believe, of a museum or an aquarium.
Right.
You know, these
And
things that are
they're experiential.
right. Right.
I need to
Experiential.
tell you,
Yeah, that's a
I
good way
need
to
to
put it.
give a quick story here. We don't usually date our podcast and such, but I'm going to give it a date today. It is the December the 14th in the year 2023. So if you're watching this 100 years from now or 200, 300, you'll be able to zero in. Why am I doing it? For three reasons. Number one, because yesterday, December the 13th, is the birthday of a person very important in my life. And number two, I'm going to tell you the story about it because it relates specifically to who we are as Americans and America. And it relates to my life. The fellow whose birthday yesterday, his name is Hubie Jones. Hubie Jones became 90 years of age yesterday, and completely there with it and all kinds of stuff. But here's what the story gets wonderful about who we are. At the age of 12, I was okay, not as outgoing as I am now, but pretty outgoing and a nice social person. And I was asked to join a group at the local JCC. JCC is Jewish Community Center. That was really there to help a person whose name was Michael, who was a severe epileptic, and therefore had all kinds of issues with being with other people and how to function in society and such. So the family had reached out to contact some social working organization. Again, you have to go back 63 years in time, it was a different era and such. And they contacted, and the agency says, "Oh, we have just the right person. We'll send them over." And there were six of us, five other boys, regular kids, and Michael, the severe epileptic. And I experienced seeing somebody have epileptic fix during the time we were together over the ensuing months and such. But in walks this remarkable young man, 27 at the time, and I was 12. He's 15 years older than I, as you can hear. And his name is Hubie Jones. Now, Hubie Jones was not Jewish, and he was not white or not Caucasian. He was this wonderful young black kid, 27, whose whole world was, how do I help? That's America. And he guided me, unbeknownst to him. He guided me by his very being. I learned more from Hubie Jones in the next year about how to be good and giving and kind and loving, caring than many other people that I've known over the decades. And I'm happy to say the following. Over the years, I stayed in touch with Hubie until I went away to college and such, let's say 18, 19, 20, and somehow lost touch just because of the nature of life, right? Well, with the internet and such, about a dozen years ago, I said I need to find Hubie. Why? Because over the years I kept reading. This guy was just making a difference in the world, Neal. He was starting organizations. He was the head of organizations that was touching tens and tens and tens of thousands of young people in the Boston area who didn't have access to stuff, who needed things. They weren't epileptics. They were just couldn't find their way because they were either very poor, marginalized, whatever the reason was. Hubie Jones was there to do things. He got not only his master's degree and his PhD, but he was recognized nationally for starting up organizations. He became a social justice warrior before the words were even there. So about 15 years ago, I reached out, and I couldn't find him exactly, but I saw one of the organizations that he had started. He was the emeritus chairman of. I reached out. I remember what happened. I called the telephone number, and I spoke to somebody, not an operator, but finally one of the people was listed on the site. And I said, "Hello, my name is Barry Shore. I know Hubie Jones for decades, and I want to reach him again. How do I do that?" The person, and I kept going on, and I said, "I knew him when I was 12." And she's probably holding the phone away from her ear and thinking, "Who the heck is with, what is this guy talking about?" And I said, "Can I have Hubie Jones' number?" Well, she said, "I'm not going to give you his number. But I'll tell you what I'll do. I will call him. And if he wants to, he'll call you." Okay. So I was crushed, but I said, "Look, good Lord, please." And I'm telling you, amazing Neal, not less than 6 hours later, I got a phone call from Hubie Jones. This is 15 years ago. So he was only 75 at the time.
How long it had been? So that, I mean, in other words, he still remembered you, but
I'd say close to half a century.
Jesus, what a memory.
Yeah, well, this is the point that you just raised. When he called up, he says, I'm crying, I can barely talk. He says, "Hey, Barry, this is Hubie. How you doing, man?"
Wow.
He said the following, and this, you can't make this stuff up. "I am now driving past Tappan Street on my way home."
Oh, so he really did remember you.
I lived on Tappan Street.
Wow.
He said, "I just passed and whenever I go by Tappan Street for the past half century, he thought of me."
Wow.
And I was just, tears running down my cheeks of joy and just telling how much I love him, how much he made a difference. And he said, "That's great." And I've stayed in touch with him every year. So on his birthday, I sing a special happy birthday song to Hubie Jones. And yesterday I got the opportunity to sing happy birthday to Hubie on his 90th birthday. And I called him this morning just to make sure he got the message. He says, "Of course I did. I love you. This is wonderful." He's sharp. He's there. And he remembers me, Neal. I remember him because he made such a difference. This is who America is. There is no such thing as offenses of race or creed or even ideology unless you're a jerk. We're talking about, like you said, we strive to be better.
Can I want to reinforce what you're saying here. Now, I'm super glad that you brought up Hubie, who is a really great example of the kind of person who he's a star in the darkness. But let's talk about the fact that he exists, and there are a lot of people like him and like you. Okay, now why is this important that we recognize that there are people like you? Because what we get fed in our media is a parade of angry dimwits, as though this is a representative cross-section of who we are as Americans. So what I want to, let's just take an example and suppose up until the point when when Roger Bannister finally ran a 3-minute mile, up until that point, 4-minute mile, excuse me, up until that point, people did not believe that human beings were capable of it. They didn't believe that there was a physical possibility that human beings could run a 4-minute mile.
Doctors wrote special papers. You can't do that. You'll burst.
Right. Then Roger Bannister does it. And then after that, it became quite common for people to run a 4-minute mile. Now, okay, what does that mean? When we get fed a steady diet of darkness and examples of how awful people can be, and they can be awful, we stop believing that it's possible that most people are good. But you have to believe that something is possible for you to imitate that behavior and strive for it. Hubie is a really good example of someone whose heart is just good. And I want to mention something about Americans that I don't think Americans are aware of. And it is that we are, all of us as a nation are striving to get better as a nation. That's one of our qualities, that the nation is striving to get better. Now, let me reinforce that with an actual statistical truism. Okay, so I lived in Hong Kong for a couple of years, and the Hong Kong Standard, which is one of their newspapers, used to run this survey. I don't know whether they did it annually, but they used to run this survey, and it was, who are the world's greatest lovers? Because Hong Kong is a very international city, they would poll the residents of Hong Kong to say, of all the nationalities, and they had, I think, 26 nationalities listed, who are the best. Now, they ran this survey because they used to delight in the fact that the Hong Kong Chinese were always last. Now, it's not because Chinese are bad lovers. It's because Hong Kong was a stress furnace, and stress is very, very bad for the romantic life. And so, unfortunately for Hong Kong, people were so busy and so overworked and so stressed. The newspaper was delighting in the fact that Hong Kong Chinese were not great lovers. It was an unfair indictment, but that was the reputation. But I was very surprised to see that year after year, who ranked first?
It wasn't the French.
It wasn't the French. It wasn't the Italians. It wasn't the Argentines. It was the Australians and Americans would tie for first year after year, but for different reasons. The Australians, because they were, quote unquote, up for anything, which kind of figures, right? But the Americans, because we were, quote, relentless self-improvers, unquote.
Ooh, I love that. Relentless self-improvers.
Right. In other words, we uniquely were open to criticism and adapted sincerely to mend our flaws. I don't think Americans give themselves enough credit. You know how we're kind of famous for self-help sections in libraries, and we kind of get ridiculed for that. Like it's a bad thing that we're all on the make trying to get better at stuff. But no, it's a good quality. It's a unique, I don't know if it's unique anymore, but it certainly was back then in like 2000. It was a uniquely American quality that we wanted to get better. We wanted to be better people, more successful, better lovers, better, and I believe that as a nation, it's part of our DNA that we don't give ourselves enough credit for. So here's what my message is. You have to take examples like Hubie, and you have to look at that and think, it's possible to be like that. It's possible to be like Barry, to go through life joyfully and spreading joy. And when Barry starts the podcast today by saying, you got to recognize the good, and when you are your best self, you will build bridges to other people and create resonance of joy around you. It's an American quality that we have to know is possible.
And on this wonderful note, because this is the Hug America podcast, we're going to do a hug, which stands for heartfelt, unlimited giving and a blessing for all. So with your permission, wonderful Neal, on the count of three. Remember, heartfelt, unlimited giving. Very American. 1, 2, 3. And our blessing from wonderful Neal, America's greatest storyteller, Barry Show, the ambassador of joy, is go forth, live exuberantly, spread the seeds of joy, happiness, peace, and love. Go mad, go make.